Welcome to episode 10 of Kontrarian Korner. I'm Ben Kelleran. Today we have a very special guest. His name's Mark Wauck. He's been writing at Meaning in History over on Substack and is a very good follow for anything as far as geopolitics, what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in Ukraine, and obviously with some of the recent events around Donald Trump yesterday. And really excited to have him on and chat with him. So, Mark, thanks for coming on.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah. If you could give our viewers a quick rundown on who you are, what you write about on your Substack, anything else they should know before we jump right in, that'd be great.
Well, just briefly, after college, I went through law school and joined the FBI. I was a special agent, just a street agent for about 30 years. I retired in 2006. And at that time, my ambition was to write about basically, you could call it philosophy of history. The title of the Substack, Meaning in History, is taken from a book by Karl Levitt, German political philosopher. And so I did that for several years, and then I thought I had kind of written myself out. And what happened was the whole Russia hoax thing came up, and people were talking about FISA. And when I was working, I worked largely for most of my career. I worked in counterintelligence and had a fair amount of experience with my legal background in FISA-related matters. So I started writing about that because it was obvious that there were a lot of misconceptions about what FISA is, and some of that was being propagated by official sources as well for political reasons. So I started talking about that, and also about, as things started moving into the courts and all, started talking about that. After that, of course, we had the election, and then following that, the impeachments, all that kind of stuff. So I just kept going on that. But after 2020, when the U.S. started its war on Russia, I started getting into that. So that kind of brings us up to where we are now. As you indicated, I've been writing about Ukraine a lot. I actually had, in a sense, some background there. I went to language school out at Monterey where I learned Polish, but I also had a lot of exposure to Eastern Europeans of all sorts, Russians, Ukrainians. And a lot of my time at that point in my working career involved, it was after the end of the Cold War. So we were talking to a lot of these people. So got into all that kind of stuff. And then with that kind of background, and I've always had an interest in history, I thought that I could, maybe shed a little light on what was going on between NATO and Russia, and because there are a lot of misconceptions there. So I got into that, and then of course after October 7th, the whole Middle East thing came up, and I had spent a little time in the past looking at some of the history there. So it was natural to move into that as well. So that's kind of how I got where I am now.
Yeah, it's a good recap. I think we can jump right into the elephant in the room of what happened with President Trump yesterday at the rally in Pennsylvania. One of the things that stood out to me is that the shooter basically was on an open rooftop, call it 150 yards away, and that seems like a massive failure by Secret Service. And some of the stuff that I've seen says that one of the counter sniper teams had the guy in their sights for like a couple minutes before.
I saw that. I was
just gonna say, I don't know if that's social media speculation or if that's anything you've heard about, but he basically was not given permission to shoot at the guy.
And then,
yeah. So it's
I was wondering.
So
the first thing that came to my mind when I saw that as well was, did he not have a good picture of the guy and thought that he might also be Secret Service? But that did not seem plausible. The what really kind of is very, very disturbing. Last night, listening to the radio, I heard an interview with a former director of Secret Service. I think it was on CBS News, so very mainstream stuff, and he was describing what their protocols were, and he was talking about the various concentric rings, perimeters around a site like that, and as well as the fact that they would have people outside those rings as well. So this guy had to come through various perimeter rings to get within that range, and that range was basically like shooting a fish in a barrel. Trump apparently must have just turned his head just as the guy was squeezing off his first shot, and it ended up grazing him. But the point is that none of those protocols were followed. There should have, the very first thing they should have done in preparing for this event was to check out all obvious, what they call sniper nests, which means in a situation like this, the top of any buildings or windows overlooking the venue, stuff like that. The Secret Service snipers were stationed behind Trump, on a rooftop behind Trump. And so they didn't, the guy had open access to get where he got to and take a direct line of sight shot like that at a very comfortable range. It's pretty mind boggling. The other thing that, of course, it comes up, you say to yourself, well, could they have skimped on some of those, on their usual protocols, because Mayorkas turned down the request for extra security? I'm having a little trouble believing that too. The whole thing is really bizarre and hard to accept.
Yeah, I think the thing that's interesting, like, I tend to be suspicious of any events like this because just kind of look at the past 20 years. But if you have certain events going on that are basically big historical, like, vibe shifts, like I would call like what happened with like the assassination attempt somewhat similar to what happened on October 7th, where it basically completely shifts the narrative and completely shifts what people are focused on, what they're thinking about, and I think wakes a lot of people up as far as paying attention to what's going on outside of the regular day to day. So I think also too, you see the media showing their basically obsolescence and what they like. If you look at some of the headlines from a CNN, MSNBC, like right as it was happening, it was like Trump rushed off the stage with loud popping noises at rally, or like, I mean, you go down the list, but you get the idea, where it's just like everyone goes straight to Twitter and no one's bothering to, I think, follow what they're saying anymore.
Exactly. In fact, I saw one tweet, some guy just saying, hey, big shout out to Elon Musk here for buying Twitter and letting us find out what's going on. And it was very true. I picked it up first on Twitter, and there were a few links, to mainstream type news sites, but I gave up on that very quickly. I was picking up far more off Twitter. The other thing is there was so much leading up to this. None of this could be really, you can't say that this was unexpected. In fact, I don't know if you saw this, Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman for, basically he's, they say the Kremlin, but he's basically Putin's press guy. And he came right out and said, look at they tried everything else, anybody, lawfare, the phony impeachments, all this kind of stuff. Anybody could see from the outside, Peskov said, that it was leading up to something like this because they tried everything else. They were obviously desperate to get Trump out of politics. And I think that's true. You can go back to 2016, with the Russia hoax beginning with, labeling him a foreign agent. Supposedly it was all a hoax. We know that now. The mainstream media won't tell you that, but it's true. Everybody knows it. But that was immediately followed by an attempted political assassination, of Scalise. We had more recently, of course, there was the Fico shooting in Slovakia. This was a guy who ran afoul of the globalist establishment in Europe. There have been numerous hints at possible attempts on Orban in Hungary, and which is also interesting to note that Trump has been meeting with Orban. That's really a signal of something going on behind the scenes, I think, that I'd really like to know more about. A possible link, with Putin, because Orban has traveled to both Moscow and Beijing and avowedly looking for a peace solution, which this administration, this regime in the U.S., it definitely does not want a peace solution. They want this war to continue. So, Tucker Carlson came out a few months ago and said they're waiting for a green light to take Trump out. Other people have suggested the same thing, and it's not, like people say, the difference between conspiracy theory and the truth is 6 months. Well, this happened within the 6 months of Tucker saying that, and it's not wild speculation because you see the determined extra legal manipulations they've gone through. They've tried everything, and nothing is working. In fact, Trump has turned into a bit of a folk hero, and now he's drawing people away from the Democrat base. I think that's what's really, really got them freaked out right now. He's appealing to their base elements, or possibly they will stay home. But this, I think, is what has the political establishment really freaked out. So, anybody who's surprised at this just hasn't been awake for the last, 10 years maybe.
Yeah, I have to give myself a little pat on the back. When I was writing my 2024 predictions, that was one of the possibilities I mentioned, that I wouldn't be surprised to see an attempt on his life. But I think it is something where it's like, if you see the lengths that these people are willing to go to for Ukraine, for the Middle East, I mean, go down the list. It's there's not any line they won't cross, I guess. So it's
and you can even go back to what we're finding out now about the Kennedy assassination. Ask yourself, based on any of these things, the coup in Ukraine, how much money we dropped financing that. But then again, going back to the Kennedy thing, what we're finding out now, you ask yourself, what reason do we have to believe any of this stuff? When you see the official collusion with the Hillary campaign, the cover-up of the Russia hoax, and how much was behind it, actually people in the FBI. And this was one of the main themes of my posts on the Russia hoax matter, was that there never, ever was any predication for that investigation. And I think that's pretty well accepted by legal, scholars now. There simply was no predication for opening any investigation at all. This was a political thing. And so when you see the politicization of our law enforcement and the entire intelligence community, you ask yourself, why should we believe anything that's put out there? It's a very tough situation, and I think with going forward on the Trump attempted assassination, I think the FBI is, which has jurisdiction over assassination attempts like this, they take over from the Secret Service. Secret Service was supposed to stop this. They didn't. And now FBI is supposed to investigate it. Well, they're going to be under the gun here because, you go back to Mueller, the other guy that Trump fired, Comey, I forgot his name for a moment, and now Ray. It's been pretty much one disaster after another, often closely linked to partisan politics, at least on the national level. The FBI still has its successes, including some recent prosecutions of corrupt Democrat politicians. But when you're talking about the national level, it's a very different ball game. And it's been one problem after another, one scandal, one hoax political operation after another. They're going to be under the gun here, I think.
Yeah, if I could ask a question, I'm not sure if this is something you saw while you were working in the FBI, or if it is something that is basically gone downhill in the last, call it 2 decades, where it's become more obvious to everyone really that the FBI and a lot of 3-letter agencies have gone political and are kind of they're not performing in the way that most people would think they do. So is that something that you kind of see that shift since you were there?
Well, for me, it's been 18 years since I retired. There was a definite cultural shift going on by the time I retired. By the time I retired, I loved my job. It was great getting up in the morning, going to work, wanting to be there, feeling that I was doing something. I was kind of a true believer for most of my career. That was beginning to change by the time I retired in 2006. There was a lot of incipient political correctness. We called it back then. Now it's wokery or whatever you want to call it.
DEI, ESG,
DEI now, yeah, it's all the same stuff, and that was becoming very much a thing by the time I retired in 2006. Now, by all accounts, it's gone way downhill. All you have to do is take a look at some of these people. The other side of it is this, and I've talked about this on my Substack, is that what happened during you mentioned 2 decades, and that's a pretty good time frame, possibly a little bit longer than that. What has happened is that the FBI, which used to be a more or less independent investigative agency, which obviously had to work with the prosecutive branch, namely DOJ, the local U.S. attorney's offices in each district, but it was still an independent agency. What has happened after Webster retired, and especially when they brought in Mueller, what you ended up with was a string of former prosecutors, not judges, but prosecutors. And they brought their own
political affiliations.
Political affiliations, but it's a kind of a prosecutorial cultural thing where they were going through a culture shift earlier than the FBI was. They were very liberal. This was kind of the case typically throughout my career, but much more liberal, and also willing to use the law to get people that were considered worthy targets. I mean, you can, with like Comey. You can go back to the Martha Stewart case. That was a perfect example. But there were more of them, and now you see the use of the Foreign Agent Registration Act for the same purpose. Back when I was working, that was never used to prosecute people, nor was it used as predication for getting a FISA on people. I know because I tried to do that myself, and they said, no, you can't do that. Little did I know what use it was going to be put to. But so they brought this this ethos or culture of we do anything, we bend any rules to get the people that we want to get. And that's what we saw, of course, throughout the Russia hoax thing. These people who were basically, there were no substantive charges they could stick against any of them because they hadn't done anything wrong, but they got them for supposed false statements, what they call process crimes. I can tell you when one of the first things I learned was that just because somebody lies to you as an FBI agent doesn't mean that we're going to prosecute them for false statements. Sadly, one of the guys, the people who legitimized that was Justice Scalia. That changed a lot of things. Once it became a crime, a prosecutable crime, once it was accepted, you could prosecute people for supposedly, arguably lying to the FBI in the course of an investigation. Then the door was open for all these other process crimes too.
The cat was out of the bag.
Yeah, so it became like charge somebody so that you can, talk to them and see if you can find, any kind of an arguable false statement, and then and go with that one.
Yeah.
So what happened was what I was leading up to was basically the FBI was taken over by the appointment of all these former prosecutors who then brought in all the other people that they knew at the at DOJ with the same attitudes. For example, Mueller brought in a pal of his named Andrew Weissman, who was very much a moving force behind the witch hunt against Trump. And there were plenty more of them like that. So what you have at the top of the FBI is a legal structure that's largely staffed by people with experience in DOJ without experience as actual investigators. And they pretty much run things, certainly, at maybe not on the local level, but when you get stuff coming through headquarters, it's all being run through these people. James Baker was another one also, came over from DOJ, any number of them. Yeah. And Chris Wray, of course, the current director, is very much of that ilk.
So I think that's really interesting because theoretically going to see them investigate what happened, and we'll get the classic FBI knew about the guy ahead of time and had him on a watch list and all that stuff. And he was on SSRIs and whatever. But to kind of steer it back to what happened with Trump a little bit, what do you think the implications of recent events are for the election? I know we have the Republican National Convention this week. Like, there's a whole bunch of moving pieces. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on kind of what the picture looks like now.
Yeah, I just did a very brief little, what I called a thought experiment on this because, arguably this assassination attempt turns the whole dynamic that was going on with Biden on its head. Going into this, it was clear, for pretty obvious reasons, I think, that the Democrats wanted him gone as fast as possible. He was an embarrassment, and an embarrassment that was likely to get worse every time he appeared in public. The Republicans, on the other hand, wanted to keep him around, for the same reason.
Yeah.
They didn't want him swapped out for a more, possibly credible candidate. Although there are a lot of problems with swapping him out. You end up with Harris, who the Democrats didn't want either anymore.
I don't think anyone wants Harris.
Right, exactly. But they initially thought that they could talk her out. Like perhaps pay her off with a nice job, a book deal, something of that sort. And she dug her heels and said, "No, I'm not going. I can be president." There's no way for them to get him out. Biden's got the delegates. As long as he's willing to put up with all the public humiliation, he's got the nomination. So,
well, I don't think he'll remember it. So
there you are. Then you get to yesterday, and to me, it's at least possible. It's arguable, put it that way, that changes the whole dynamic. Now, with all the insane, violent rhetoric that which JD Vance tweeted out, I think last night or this morning, the whole predicate of the Biden campaign and of the whole Democrat campaign generally is that Trump is an existential threat. He's going to make himself a dictator. He's a threat to our democracy, to our whole constitutional order. Well, he's literally Hitler. So, and you've had people like Rick Wilson calling for somebody to shoot him. So, all these are reasons why this didn't come as a big surprise. But now that it's happened, and we've got that iconic photograph of Trump, with his fist pump and with the flag in the background and all, we're going to be seeing that 24/7 up until November and probably after that. He's becoming a hero, a legend in his own time here. And the Democrats, do you really want to get rid of Joe at that point? Do you want to find somebody who you think might be credible in 2028 and put him up against Trump now to be destroyed? Maybe not. Maybe they'll just say, let Joe deal with it. On the other hand, for the Republicans, you probably very much want to focus on the rhetorical incitement to violence and assassination that's been going on here and led right up to this. And so how do you do that? Well, you could be calling for him to resign from the presidency for having incited political violence. You could institute an impeachment process if you want to, see if it'll get shot down. It doesn't matter if it gets shot down or not. You've done it, and you're going to put the Democrat Party on the hook for coming out against basically being in favor of this kind of campaign rhetoric. It brands them. It gives them a whole new brand. The party of political violence. So it puts the shoe on the other foot entirely. I think, at least arguably, that's part of the dynamic going forward. And I wouldn't be surprised to see this playing out to some extent. They've already announced they're going to be having hearings. They're going to certainly be bringing Mayorkas in front of them. Maybe that'll lead to another, impeachment of him. But I think they're going to need to focus on Biden, and I think they will.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next month. I think the Democratic convention is early to middle August, somewhere in there.
Yeah. They shot themselves in the foot. They made sure that he got the delegates that he needs, and now all of a sudden they need to have him go. And he or Jill or somebody or Hunter, doesn't want him to go. And, whether it's about the pardons or whatever, we don't know. But, right now, it doesn't look like, they're going to have to pull something really, really drastic.
Quickly, too.
And quickly. That's the thing. And of course, as you're probably aware, there are problems with getting anybody else on the ballot in at least a couple swing states, Wisconsin, Georgia, and I think Nevada.
I remember hearing someone mention Ohio too on that list. Could be wrong.
Yes, I saw that, and I forget the details. But Ohio is also a problem. You can't give these states up, like that. And then, of course, there's the problem with all the money that was raised already. It's an almost insoluble problem. So I'm beginning to think they're just going to leave them in place, maybe, and take their lumps.
Yeah.
Although that seems a stretch. I mean, when did they ever give up?
Yeah, I think it's unlikely, but you never know. So speaking of Ohio and J.D. Vance, that kind of leads into his vice presidential pick and who you think is going to be on the ticket with Trump. I think it kind of comes down to a couple options where I'd love to see J.D. Vance. I know a lot of people have talked about Tulsi Gabbard. I know some people are floating the idea of Eric Prince now after what happened with all the stuff there. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on who he's going to pick.
Yeah, whether it's actually in place, really written in stone. I don't know. I know Tom Longo has been talking up Tulsi Gabbard, and I can see the pluses there. The appeal there. The last few times I've watched her, she says a lot of things that you have to like, but it seems a little bit rehearsed to me. She's got a great speaking voice, and she's proven that she can handle herself in a debate. Those are all good things. Vance can do that too, though. And he obviously wants the nomination very badly. It's hard to tell.
Well, I think too with Vance, like that'd be a huge positive for like the Rust Belt and the states in that part of the country. Like
totally. Yeah. With Tulsi, it's obvious that the appeal would be to women. But with Vance, you get out there to the whole Rust Belt thing. He's got a lot of appeal in that area, and it just with his political views as well. It'd work very well, and I think he would. It wouldn't be just the Rust Belt. I think he'd appeal to a very broad cross section of the country. You'd kind of like to see Trump pick somebody, push the envelope a little on the choice rather than one of these kind of generic governors. It's obviously he's playing it to surprise us all, or at least to keep us watching. So we're just gonna have to see.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be interesting run for the next 4 or 5 months. But I think we could talk about that all day. But I'd like to shift to some of the big picture stuff as far as what's going on the world stage with Ukraine and the Middle East. All the stuff that I've seen out of Ukraine is that they're in deep trouble and Russia's basically in the driver's seat. But NATO and the West is content to kind of keep things strung out as long as possible. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, is this something that wraps up, or is this something that Russia is basically content to drag out for as long as possible?
At a certain until October 7th, I think Russia might have been willing to let this drag out too, just as NATO wants it to drag out. For Russia, the attraction is that they get to disarm NATO. Everything we send over there is getting destroyed. In fact, the Wall Street Journal had an article just within the last week, I believe it was, in which they were saying, all of our smart weapons are getting the Russians figure them out within weeks or months, and takes them all down. HIMARS, Excalibur, ATACMS. They may not get them 100%, but it's we're disarming ourselves because we can't build them fast enough to replenish our stocks. So from that standpoint, dragging it out for the Russians is a very attractive thing. The Abrams tanks, the Leopard tanks, they've all been shown to be extremely vulnerable, and NATO and the U.S. even has been giving all this stuff up. But I think that changed a bit with October 7th, with so much happening around the world, in the Middle East, with the very bellicose rhetoric against China. I think the Russians don't want to be spread too thinly. And so I suspect that they would now prefer to get some kind of an end to the war in Ukraine. Now, what that means concretely, I'm not sure. They're not going to do a ceasefire, or at least they won't do it except on their terms. Putin made that clear. No ceasefire until they pull out of all the areas that Russia has formally already incorporated, and also declares their neutrality. Well, as long as we have control of the Ukrainian government, those conditions won't be met, or at least not under this administration. So they have to keep going, but they are in the driver's seat. The people I listen to a lot, Doug McGregor, John Mearsheimer, Danny Davis, they're all saying, this could end by August, September. It may simply collapse by then. And I just saw a quote of some of the Ukrainian servicemen saying, morale is terrible. Nobody wants to fight. There's only a couple months left for us. And the Russians seem to be pushing this now. They've essentially established, after that Crimean beach attack, they've basically established a no-fly zone over the Black Sea. Our drones that used to be flying out there, helping with the targeting and guidance of missiles, they're no longer out there. In fact, some of them have shown up with the same call signs in the Eastern Mediterranean along the Lebanon coast. So they're enforcing this no-fly zone, which makes it much more difficult for the Ukrainians to launch much of an effective defense. And they're moving forward with increasing momentum. So it looks like this could be coming to an end sooner rather than later. I mean, some people say, well, it'll last till 2025. It's beginning to look like not. So, yeah. And I think the reason for that the Russians may decide to push it, they've been trying to minimize casualties, no question about it, which is a good thing. In times past, when there were lots of young men to feed into the military like that, it was a different thing perhaps for the ruling class. Now, you can't afford to do away with your young men. They're a valuable resource, and Putin knows that, and he's not going to do that. But they may up the tempo, nevertheless. Now that they've got that no-fly zone in effect, they've got the countermeasures to most of what NATO has given to Ukraine. So it looks like they can up the tempo and bring this to a close sooner than the conventional wisdom expects.
So that sort of begs the question of, do you think NATO troops get more directly involved in Ukraine? Like, I know from some of the stuff I've seen, there's already smaller groups operating some of the weapon systems and whatnot, but do you think that's something that becomes more widely acknowledged and we start sending more NATO troops in if Ukrainian troops falter?
I don't think we can afford that. Even as it is now, I'm not sure we can afford the losses we're taking already. If you listen to some of these ex-military guys, they will, for example, F-16s. They say it takes to train a pilot on an F-16 takes about 3 years to get to true competency with that. Well, so obviously the Ukrainian pilots aren't going to be able to do it, but it'd be almost a suicide mission for NATO pilots to get in there. Now, you take less complicated systems, they're still complicated. The modern artillery, modern missile artillery, this stuff is very complicated too, and it takes a long time to train on that. Sending our people over there to operate that stuff, and with I've seen recent stories that the Russians have become increasingly effective in finding and destroying the HIMARS systems. Well, yet when you start losing your trained personnel, you've got to replace them somehow. And guess what? We're having big problems recruiting for our military, mostly for all that DEI reasons, as I understand it. So you're running to get more deeply involved with personnel sent over there runs the risk of ending up stripping our military of its most valuable resource, which is highly trained personnel. So I would expect that they will back away from that. Now, I will add too, who was I reading who was saying this? Just a day or two ago, was saying that I want to get this right. It was Doug McGregor, and he was saying that he thinks that the donor class, which is showing itself to be very much in rebellion against this the Biden campaign, his belief is that part of this is being driven by opposition to all this war. I mean, because these people are people who made their money in business, and nowadays you can't make that kind of money unless you're doing things internationally for the most part. You're working with China, and then you see all this talk about sanctioning China and trying to crush their economy. Well, that could crush the donor class too. Things of this sort. So they're becoming very concerned about that. Along those lines, Trump came up with two major additions to his donor group. One was David Sachs. Now, David Sachs' big issue is Ukraine. He wants that war to end. That's his big issue. He has a few other issues too. Now, the other one, which came up earlier yesterday, I think, or perhaps on Friday, was Elon Musk. Elon Musk, of course, has a variety of issues, but his big issue these days is freedom of speech. And I really, really like Jonathan Turley's idea on this. Turley, you may be familiar with. He's a very high-profile legal professor at George Washington University, testifies before Congress on all kinds of high-level stuff, like on impeachments and so forth. He's written a book on the threat to freedom of speech, fingering this administration as the biggest threat ever to freedom of speech, and he's been urging Trump, at least through Twitter, he's been urging Trump to make this issue a centerpiece of his campaign. Well, a guy who probably would like that is Elon Musk, and he just gave a substantial donation, which, coming from the richest man in the world, could be pretty big to Trump. So, all these concerns about what's going on, because, as you'll recall, Musk also just revealed publicly that the EU tried to bribe him to allow them to censor Twitter if he would keep quiet about that, and they would make it okay for him. So these are big issues. Both Sachs and Musk understand that in addition to the deep state here, there's the whole globalist establishment operating in the EU that's behind the wars, the censorship, and all this. So there's a bunch of things going on here that are kind of converging. The need for, it's not, on the one hand, you got the U.S. deep state, which is very much into foreign policy and foreign wars. On the other hand, the Democrat Party is very much into controlling information flow in the United States and controlling political discourse and so forth. Well, those things kind of converge because the deep state needs a compliant population at home to allow for these their aggressive policies overseas, which is why they needed to get rid of Trump as a danger, as not reliable in supporting their policy plans. So each side had their own reasons for wanting Trump out, and they kind of converge. They, one hand washes the other kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see all these factions, because you see some of that stuff happening in financial markets as well, where there's some price action that's definitely not organic, but I think sets up for a really interesting handful of years at least. I think the fourth turning, there's some issues I have with that idea, but we're definitely in one of those cycles of history where you can have decades happening really fast. So
if when you get older, that happens too.
Yeah. If we could shift to what's going on in the Middle East, one of the things that I found interesting is that talking about what's been going on in Israel with Gaza, Palestine, has basically been like a third rail for a long time. And then all of a sudden, after October 7th, basically like Pandora's box was opened on social media. And part of that, like you're saying with Twitter, is kind of basically took the restraints off a bit. But the mainstream media is still kind of sweeping a lot of stuff under the rug over there. I'd be curious to hear what you think the path looks like for Israel, maybe how they kind of interact with Iran, other countries in the area, and what you kind of think that looks like moving forward.
Well, what you were saying about after October 7th, a lot of the stuff surfacing, and I think that's been the big change here in the United States. It used to be just Steve Walton and John Mearsheimer speaking about the Israel lobby and its influence. Now everybody's talking about it, kind of, or at least it seems that way. And people are looking at the personnel within this Biden regime, and they're seeing the same people with the same interests in both the war on Russia and also in enabling the genocide in Gaza, the continuous use of enormous dumb bombs that have no purpose other than to kill large numbers of people indiscriminately that we're seeing, and we're constantly supplying that. I saw an article not long ago about how like 20 White House staffers were very alarmed about what was going on, and they sought some an interview with Trump's top advisors, who are virtually all what you could consider part of the Israel lobby. And they were basically gaslit, told, well, we can't say anything against Israel publicly. We'll work, try to restrain them in private, an obvious gaslighting operation. But so these two things are actually tied together. Now, going forward, this is a perfect example of how things just don't stay the same. It's in a way similar to what happened with Russia. Russia was very, very upset about our bombing campaign against Serbia. They were upset with our attempts to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO. But until recently, they weren't in a position to do anything about it. But things always do change. And, we went around the world expending our resources fighting colonial type wars. And Russia, rebuilt itself economically, but also militarily. Well, the same thing's been going on in the Middle East. Things have not remained the same. Israel still has a formidable military, to the extent that U.S. military systems, weapons systems, are still formidable. But nothing stays the same. And as Doug McGregor or somebody, I forget, it all runs together, said just the other day, we're in the age of the missile. Missiles can be made cheaply and effectively, and they can, they're very, very hard to stop, as Iran demonstrated by landing several ballistic missiles on that Israeli major, their most secure airbase, Nevatim, I think is the name of it. So nothing stays. Hezbollah now has some vast arsenal of missiles. They're only using small fractions of them, and mostly just artillery rocket type ones. But they have missiles that probably cannot be stopped by any air defense that Israel or the U.S. Could muster. So this changes the whole equation. It's totally unlikely that Russia and China would stand by and allow the U.S. and Israel to destroy Iran. The only way that it could be done, really practically speaking, I believe, it would be with nuclear weapons. And there's no possible way that Russia would stand still for that. They've already increased their military cooperation with Iran, and this whole missile age dynamic makes most of our bases in the region highly, highly vulnerable. Our big base in Qatar, Al-Udein, is totally vulnerable to missile attack from Iran. I mean, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump away. We cannot sail in the Persian Gulf with impunity anymore, and we can hardly do it in the Arabian Sea, as the Houthis are showing, with relatively simple, missile technology. If anybody from Iran, Russia, China cares to share, missile technology with them at a little higher level, our carriers are going to be sitting ducks. There's already the strong suspicion that the Eisenhower was actually hit by a drone, a missile, something of the sort. And I saw a statement by a pilot from the Eisenhower that just returned to the U.S. saying that they were pretty traumatized at being under attack. It's one thing, we've always been used to bombing people from long distance, from high altitudes, and not being threatened. And they felt that they were being targeted and finding it a challenge to defeat the attacks being made on them. So this was very stressful for them, and at some point, it will happen. A carrier will be hit if they continue this way. So with all of that in place, things have just changed, and although Israel hasn't quite faced up to it, they obviously have not defeated Hamas. They're in no position, with their military degraded as it has been, to attempt an invasion of southern Lebanon. They keep threatening it, but it never seems to happen. And they hint at the use of tactical nukes, but I think they understand that opens Pandora's box. Turkey is looking at getting nukes too. Iran has publicly stated that they're on that path. Now, they've always said that they didn't want to do it, but now with all the saber rattling, nuclear saber rattling, they're saying, we're going to have to do it. Sooner or later, I think what's going to happen, and also Israel is losing some of its most talented people. They're emigrating because they can see that long term survivability is just not going to be the same. It can't remain the same. There's going to have to be, at a minimum, some sort of accommodation politically, which also means a military and a security one. It's a question of time before the Israeli population comes to that realization. The Biden administration is doing them no favors at all by allowing them to continue to kid themselves about that. I don't believe that they would, apparently they used the Hannibal option by killing their own people after the raid by Hamas into Israel. But I don't believe they would do the Solomon option, which I don't know if you're familiar with that concept. It's like, total nuclear destruction. We go down in a nuclear cloud along with the rest of the Middle East. I don't think they do it. I think they want to survive.
I hope they don't do it, but
no.
I mean, the question that it was a really good breakdown, but one of the questions I had is, like, what does the timeline look like, you think? Like, you said Ukraine might be wrapping up here in the next couple months, but what do you think it looks like for Israel?
I think it's going to, the question is, obviously, with the coming election, I think the Middle Eastern countries don't want a regional war, and so they will allow this to continue. They don't like it, but they're going to allow this to continue because they realize how destructive it would be. On the other hand, this is destructive for the United States as well, politically. There are a lot of people saying now that Michigan is unwinnable for the Democrats because they have a large Arab population, which is largely Lebanese and Shiite. These are people who strongly identify with Hezbollah in the Detroit area, but there are others too. There are Christian Arabs in the Detroit area as well, a large population of them. It's a niche thing, but it's a growing demographic, and it's important, and they've been solidly Democratic, and now that is changing. Now, Republicans have done absolutely nothing to win over that demographic. But this could change with the new donor class that is coming on with Trump if they are truly opposed to this neocon ideology of forever wars around the world to keep the U.S. the global hegemon. It also, plays into your field, monetary stuff. It appears that the shift from the dollar is happening a little more quickly than most people anticipated, and that could play into it as well. So I think that if Russia can bring this to some sort of manageable conclusion, they will be able to shift attention to the Middle East. And just as China has already inserted themselves between Iran and Saudi Arabia to bring about a rapprochement there, I think that Russia could also be offering its diplomatic services there. And I think the pressure will grow because of the Houthi blockade as well, the economic pressure on the West from that. So I think there's it could last going into the new year, but I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Trump or whoever gets elected to bring this to some sort of conclusion. We're running too short of military of munitions and weapon systems, and we're degrading our, you saw that with the Eisenhower was there, I forget how many months, it was way past the usual tour. We can't keep enough of our stuff actually on duty to support the kind of hegemony we've been used to. So I think there's a lot of converging factors moving toward bringing this Middle East thing into some sort of workable solution. Another big story that's gets a little attention here in the U.S. is that Erdogan is making public overtures to Syria. Well, that's a real no-no for a NATO member to be doing. But how long Turkey remains in NATO is another story. And if we want to keep Turkey on board with us, we're going to have to pay attention to their concerns as well. The long and the short of it is, just as John Mearsheimer keeps repeating, is that supporting Israel without question, no matter what they do, genocide or whatever, is simply not in the long-term interests of the United States. And increasingly now, as you said, that long-term is becoming shorter. And we need to address these things sooner rather than later. So I've got to believe the next year from now, if something hasn't changed drastically, I'd be very much surprised.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces in the Middle East. I think some version of a stalemate is kind of the best you can hope for, just because of the number of different groups involved. But while I have you on, I'd be remiss not to ask you about what you think on Taiwan and China. I know a lot of people have talked about, I guess you look at some of the rhetoric coming out of the Washington, D.C. and political establishment, and it's been a big shift to China. I know tariffs are kind of an election issue. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, is a blockade and invasion a likely outcome, or is it something that I find it unlikely that they would get, that things go hot? I think it's probably more of a political influence game, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on Taiwan, China, that whole situation there.
Well, I agree with you that it's. I think a full-scale war is very unlikely because it's not in the interests of the Chinese people, and the people on Taiwan are basically Chinese people too. They may like their situation just the way it is, and the mainland China proper can probably live with that as well. The reality is that Taiwan's economy is highly, just like every other economy in the area, the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, uh, Vietnam, all these places, their economies are closely linked with China's. They do not want a war with China at all. Um, uh, you know, yes, Taiwan is the semiconductor manufacturing center of the world, but a lot of their semiconductor stuff is manufactured on the mainland, not in Taiwan. So why would they want to, cut their nose to spite their face? Uh, uh, some kind of accommodation will be found, and I don't think Xi Jinping is interested in a war either. What he's interested in is not having the United States butting into what they legitimately view as a Chinese affair. And I don't think we're in any military position to do any of that stuff anymore. If we can't break the Red Sea blockade, how are we ever going to project power across the Pacific into China? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And sooner or later, as we were saying earlier, the donor class, I think, understands that. Even those who agree with Trump that we need to revive our own industrial base, fine. That all that is fine and good. But for the time being, we're totally dependent on China, including our military industries are dependent on Chinese production. That's not China's fault. That's our fault. So.
Yeah, I remember seeing a graph of all the different components that went into. I can't remember which one it was, but it was one of the complicated planes. Yeah, but I mean, it's basically, I think it was something more than it was more than half, and it's just like that's not a. I think basically the U.S. and China are kind of tied at the hip at this point as far as the economy and all these different things that are basically something that would just be too complicated to try and unravel, at least quickly. So there might be a shift to more U.S. manufacturing, but that's not something that happens overnight.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. So I think that's a pretty good place to wrap up. I think we covered kind of all the different topics I wanted to hit on, but one of the closing questions I came up with is, what book do you think I should add to my reading list? Can be history, finance, anything you think would be interesting.
Oh my gosh. Well, see, when you ask a question like that, that takes me back to my beginnings. I was in college. I was a philosophy major. Uh, so if you want to understand how we got where we are, I would highly recommend Etienne Gilson's The Unity of Philosophical Experience. It one of my big bugbears is what we generally term liberalism, by which I would say that Republicans and Democrats are both liberal parties within the big scheme of politics.
Two sides of the same coin.
Uniparty, if you want to call it that way, yes. They're basically ideologically they're coming from the same direction with their birth in the Enlightenment, in a radical skepticism that took hold in the West. This is what Putin talks about as well, about the West renouncing its culture. Gilson's book shows how that developed into the early modern age with Kantian philosophy, which is most people don't understand this, but Kant's theory, what he calls it, what we call Kantian agnosticism. It's a radical skepticism about our ability to know reality. He basically argues that the human mind imposes structure upon a reality that we don't really know. Well, that has been applied throughout academia, especially in the legal field. And Gilson's book takes it from the origins in the early Middle Ages up through the rest of the Middle Ages to its fruition in Kantian and Hegelian philosophy. And Hegelian philosophy is what animated the progressive movement in the United States, epitomized by Woodrow Wilson and the others around the turn of the two centuries, 19th and 20th centuries, and has continued to metastasize through the 20th century into what we see now. If you really want to get a deep understanding of Gilson's book, we'll give that to you.
All right, I'll definitely add that to the list. I think that'll be it's interesting because you see a lot of stuff that has happened over the last 100 years and how it kind of has led us to this point that we're at today. So I think it's interesting because a lot of people look at history and they think it started like 2 years ago with what happened in Ukraine, like as soon as Russia invades. So it's like, no, all this stuff has ties back to what's been going on for decades, if not centuries.
Oh, absolutely, centuries.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, I think that's a good place.
Having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. I guess before I let you go, why don't you remind viewers one last time where they can find your Substack or anything else you want to plug?
Well, it's simply called Meaning in History, and you can find it on Substack or with my name, or you've got it liked on your Substack, followed on your Substack. They can find it there. Just go to your page if they want to.
Yeah.
Always appreciated, of course.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to come on. I think with that, we'll be wrapping up. So thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.